Okay, I think we're going to get started. There might be some stragglers, we'll see. It's really a privilege for me to introduce Dr. Alisa Coffin. So Alisa and I got connected, we were just discussing. John Kerekes and I went down to Beltsville, Maryland, to the USDA site there to go visit them, talk RIT. It was arranged by Christina Owens, Debbie Stendardi, so the office for the Vice President for Government Relations, Government Community Relations. So they organized this trip down to DC, and we sort of got to chatting about remote sensing, imaging in agriculture. Anything from using satellites and drones to look at crop growth to, believe it or not, installing thermal cameras in, I don't know, pigsties to detect the new birth, right? So that the sows don't roll over on the new hatchlings, whatever you call little piglets, hatchlings. Long story short is there's so much to do in imaging, and the folks in Beltsville pointed us in Alisa's direction. She just does a lot of the geospatial analysis with the ARS, Agricultural Research Service. They're the research arm of USDA. And Alisa got her undergraduate degree at Rutgers in, I think you said, sort of a morphed ag ecology degree. It didn't quite exist, the concept of agricultural ecology. And she was really interested in that, so she convinced her advisor there that they could cobble together this degree in ag ecology. Spent some time overseas, and then went to Harvard for an MLA, Master's in Landscape Architecture. And then decided that she wanted to actually get a PhD in geography down in the University of Florida. Mm-hmm. So did a postdoc at USGS, and then started at Ball State.
No, that was before geography.
Before geography. So she was a professor at Ball State too. You said this morning there was a lot of movement. So,
yeah.
Spent some time in Colorado at the USDA, and now finds herself in Georgia, also still at the USDA. So it's been really interesting. We've been chatting about collaboration. Hopefully, those of you who have met with Alisa today have had a productive discussion. I've seen that the USDA is really willing partners, looking for collaborative type opportunities with any and all of us, right? So welcome. I hope you enjoyed your stay thus far, and we look forward to the talk. Thanks, Alisa.
Thank you so much, Jan, and thank you everyone for having me here. It's been a really nice opportunity for me to come and meet everyone and learn about RIT. I'm so impressed with what I've been seeing today. It's been really fabulous, and I'm going to have a hard time trying to remember everything, so I need to try and write it down before I forget it all, but I've just been having a great day. So thank you so much for making time to meet with me. And I'm just going to be talking to you today about some of the research applications from remote sensing that we're doing in the long-term. And I've listed here a whole long list of co-authors or collaborators, people that I work with in the LTAR network. And usually when you see a big long list of authors like this, you're either looking at like a seminal paper where some great scientific discovery is happening, or it's tossed salad. So today we have the latter. I'm going to be sharing with you just a kind of sampling of the many different applications that are going on across the ARS and in particular the LTAR network. So I'm going to start with kind of telling you a little bit about the ARS and the Long-Term Agroecosystem Research Network. So the USDA Agricultural Research Service is within the mission of the Research, Education, and Economics area of the USDA. And the mission for the ARS is to conduct research to develop solutions for agricultural problems of high national priority, to ensure high quality, safe food, assess nutritional needs, sustain a competitive agricultural economy, and enhance the resource base in our environment, and then provide opportunities, economic opportunities in rural communities and for rural citizens. So we have a kind of broad vision that encompasses economic, environmental, and production sort of domains. The Long-Term Agroecosystem Research Network began in 2012, and it's a network of 18 sites across the U.S. And you can see this map here kind of shows the general regions where each of the sites are located. My LTAR site is this one here, the Gulf Atlantic Coastal Plain site in Georgia. And you can see we've got up near where we are now, we have the upper Chesapeake Bay site and the Eastern Corn Belt site, which kind of help to cover this region of the country. The work in the LTAR network includes many non-ARS partners, and I want to apologize right up front for not including everybody's logo in my presentation. I thought about it this morning at 6, and I thought, I don't have time to go and search the web for everybody's logo, so I really do apologize, and I'm going to add those logos in a future presentation. But we do have numerous partners across multiple government agencies and many universities across the country. So the main focus of the LTAR network is to facilitate long-term research on sustainable intensification of agriculture for the nation, recognizing that we're facing critical limits to agricultural production in the coming years with the population expansion and sort of the limits of agriculture. So the LTAR network was developed to try and address some of these research questions by implementing a common experimental strategy across multiple sites, comparing management practices of agriculture that we could consider business as usual practices with transformative practices that we might refer to as aspirational. And in any given LTAR site, those are going to look different, but they may include 2 or 3 different aspirational systems as we sort of try to incorporate more transformative ideas. The outcomes for this research, the goal is to measure them in terms of production and ecosystem services and impacts to rural prosperity, or the human dimensions of rural life. And the work is carried out at various scales. So it's carried out at the plot level with very controlled plot level experiments. It's carried out at field scales and then at the enterprise level, so a particular farming operation. Individual sites tend to focus their experimental strategies and particular sort of the focus of outcomes on concerns for the region. So for example, in my region, we focus almost exclusively on the crop rotations that involve corn, cotton, and peanut, although we have aspirational production systems that are incorporating integrated livestock and cropping systems. So in this map you see here, the different colors on the map refer to the types of systems that people are studying. So the green being cropping systems primarily. The sort of tan color here are rangeland systems, and the blue are what we call integrated systems, where you have cropping and livestock together. So the LTAR is organized, as I mentioned, across 18 sites. Each site has a site lead, and each site designs its experimental protocols and framework. But we do have common protocols across the entire network that relate to obtaining common measurements for certain basic things that we get from, say, eddy covariance towers and phenocams across each of the network. And these protocols are still in the process of being developed. So soil moisture protocols, for example, are being discussed in the context of Cal-Val programs with the network is also organized into groups that kind of overlap and share resources. So on the one hand, we have sort of common experiment groups where you'd have all of the rangeland sites kind of talking to each other, and all of the cropping sites talking to each other. And then across this is kind of an infrastructure of data management, modeling, the use of remote sensing and GIS, and then we have thematic work groups. So there are some work groups that really focus on specific aspects of measurements and indicators in soils and meteorology. We have a weather and climate group, hydrology group, a wind erosion group, and each of these work groups are making progress at sort of different rates. So some groups have been very proactive and very organized in moving forward with specific research questions. For example, the wind erosion group has actually formed a separate kind of a network within a network called the Wind Erosion Network, and they've published a number of papers. The Weather and Climate group has been working on developing a really interesting tool for breaking down remote sensed climate information. The biology group, on the other hand, has been a little bit stymied by trying to figure out protocols that would be applicable for different types of LTAR sites. So we're really in the throes of emerging as a network, and it's messy. It's not mature. It's developing, and it's also very exciting. So with regards to remote sensing and GIS, this is a working group that I kind of started with about 4 other people in 2016. So we're now a little over 3 years old. We have about 80 members in our group now, and we're sort of providing an opportunity as a clearinghouse for the network for expertise and information on GIS and remote sensing. So not every LTAR location has a GIS analyst or a remote sensing scientist. So part of what we can do is help individual sites link up to expertise and projects that could feed into the overall LTAR network opportunities. So the current situation with remote sensing research in the LTAR network is something like this, where we have a number of projects that are going on. So we have a group of projects that are kind of like individual projects that are happening at individual sites. These may be projects that have been going on for quite some time, or maybe don't have very direct links to LTAR research objectives. So there'd be a bunch of those because we've been around for quite a while. One of the criteria for inclusion in the LTAR network is that you have a long history of sort of data production and research in-house. So every site that has joined the network has a substantial history of agricultural research production. So there are a lot of those kind of projects already in existence. There are some projects that are also happening at individual LTAR sites that have been kind of started up in the last few years and are directly related to LTAR objectives, but there may be just occurring, at a couple of 1 or 2 sites. They're not really expanding yet across the network. And then we have research that's occurring across multiple LTAR sites, but may not be directly related to LTAR research. So an example of that might be, like SMAP calibration validation. SMAP is the soil moisture active passive sensor, and so for ARS has a long history of involvement in NASA campaigns to provide validation for ground truthing And so that would be an example of the kind of thing where you might have several LTAR sites participating in a remote sensing research project, but it's not directly related to LTAR research. And then this is sort of the goal, right? It's for us to kind of develop networked level research that directly relates to LTAR research questions in this remote sensing context. So our goal as a working group is to try and encourage and promote and move us as a network in that direction. So we're always looking for opportunities and a way to kind of tie into fundamental LTAR related research questions that could be addressed only at a network level. So I'm going to just run through several of these projects. So this is again the tossed salad that I mentioned, and give you an idea of the kinds of things that people are doing. And while I'm really recognizing here that most of you have a lot more knowledge about the physics and mathematics that goes behind imaging science, I would never ever try to claim that I know more than you about any of that. But I'm just giving you a kind of an overview of the kinds of applications that we are trying to do across some of our network sites. So one of these is using hyperspectral imagery to improve grassland vegetation mapping. This is a project that's being done now at the Central Plains Experimental Range LTAR site in Colorado, being led by Rowan Gaffney and Lauren Perensky with David Augustine. And this is a project that's really trying to get at being able to understand how to monitor and measure vegetation quality, which is key for cattle operations in open range environments. And the traditional grassland mapping techniques that people have used are highly labor intensive, where they require detailed field analyses, or they have poor spatial resolution because they're based on something like a soils map. So you can see here, this is the sort of the field network, the network location at Central Plains Experimental Range, which is just east of Fort Collins. And these are all sort of plot sites that they have out in the different range areas, and these all have different grazing regimes associated with them. And then this is sort of the current map as it is underneath there. You can see that's not really that desirable. So one thing they've been doing as a NEON site, which is a National Ecological Observatory Network, they have access to hyperspectral data that is provided by the Aerial Observation Platform. It provides 1 meter spatial resolution with 358 usable spectral bands. And so Rowan and Lauren have been working on using HPC computing workflows to analyze this hyperspectral data and create higher definition, more accurate maps. And so you can see this map compared to the one that we have over here is far more detailed, and this is a preliminary result, but you can begin to see that it's really starting to pick out some of the management aspects of grasslands that are reflected in the data. So that's one of the projects that's ongoing. Another one which is a little bit different, and I think it's really pretty cool. This is out at the Great Basin site in Idaho, being run by Pat Clark and others from the University of Idaho, where they're trying to look at snowpack and using UAV imagery for water supply forecasting. So this is in a western region which is highly dependent on winter snowpack for supplying water in the western states. And a better understanding of the snowpack would allow for more accurate water supply forecasting and decision making. So the current assessments that they have are pretty constrained because of the distribution of snow monitoring sites, which are sparse and difficult to get to. But what they've been doing is flying a UAV over this area, the Red Lakes area, to measure snow on and snow off conditions. And so using the digital surface models that are created from using structure from motion, they're able to sort of estimate the depth of the snowpack and then combine that with snow density models to estimate the amount of water that's being stored in the snowpack. So then these periodic flights would allow them to assess both the spatial and the temporal variability in snow-water equivalence. So this is another kind of example of one particular LTAR site using remote sensing from UAVs. In my site in Georgia, I have been using a Matrice 100 carrying a red edge camera to periodically measure, fly over a couple of farms. So here you see our UAV flying over a farm in the sort of northern reaches of our region, and then one of the resulting maps and NDVI maps from another farm. And what you can see on this map is that there's a grid of points. And this grid of points is used to collect ground data. We collect biomass, soil carbon nitrogen. We look at soil particle size distributions. We have soil moisture sensors, not at every one of those locations, but roughly 3 per field. We've also, on a sort of every other point, been taking measurements of insects, both ground-dwelling and canopy-dwelling insects. And then I also use digital hemispherical photography to collect, to estimate LAI and FAPAR in the crops. And then also take phenology measurements by just essentially photographing the crop as it's growing and assigning a phenological stage to it. We also have an eddy flux covariance tower located here with a phenocam that is taking continual measurements in this crop site. And then we also measure the amount of irrigation that's being applied to this central field that has a center pivot. And sort of looking at our data from 2018, we had, I believe, something like 12 flights in one field and 10 or 12 in another. And when I sampled the data at our sort of grid points, was able to develop a nice NDVI curve from the early part of the season through sort of bare ground conditions. You capture the really nice sort of greening up curve, and then as we get into the end of the season, this was in cotton. Cotton is sprayed down with a defoliant right around the end of September to just get rid of all the leaves, and the only thing that's left are stalks and cotton bolls. So you can really see those changes in that the NDVI curve. The NDVI is the normalized difference of vegetation index, which is an index of red and near infrared bands to measure basically plant health. Another application for UAVs in my area has been a very simple application to look at being able to try and estimate pollinator habitat. So pollinator habitat is on the decline nationally, and we have very serious problems with the decline in bees, wild bees especially. So this is an area of great concern to try and get a handle on how we can help to support pollinator populations in the wild and in our agricultural spaces. And there are a number of drivers for population decline, and one of those is habitats disappearing. So we wanted to explore the use of a UAV to be able to assess wildflower planting strips that could be placed around the edges of crop fields. So this was a student project. Shireen Xavier was a master's student in entomology, and she had a very simple, off-the-shelf drone with a basic, I think it was a GoPro camera, an RGB camera, and she, flew these buffer plots and classified the blooms within the plots, and was able to generate a floral area, and then compare that with sort of traditional methods for counting flowers, and then looking at how that related to the pollinators that were visiting those plots. So what she found was that the UAV wasn't quite as good as doing it the traditional way, but it provided a reasonable approximation of being able to go out and visually count all of the flowers with a considerable savings in time. So then she was able to publish this in a nice paper that came out in Remote Sensing last year. And so this is a kind of effort that I think really, if it were sort of developed a little bit further, could be, for example, a really nice tool for county extension agents to be able to provide information about what's going on with pollinators in our area. Now, she had all of the resources of working with, high-end computing systems to refine the imagery and classify it and do all of the work that she needed to do, which would not be available to a grower or an extension person. So I think that there is an opportunity here to really figure out how to operationalize something like this into a tool that could help us tell us something about what's going on with pollinators in the environment. So moving on, another set of projects. These are projects that sort of look at remote sensing applications across multiple LTAR sites. The first one of these is looking at mapping crop conditions at field scale using multi-sensor data fusion. This is work that's being done by Feng Gao in the Beltsville group in USDA and ARS. And what he's trying to get at is sort of an ability to look at broad areas using remote sensing to observe plant phenology. So this rapid assessment of crop condition requires measuring phenology on a really regular basis, daily or weekly basis, to be able to understand and estimate how crop production is taking place. So operational remote sensing sensors have different characteristics, and you might have, we also take phenology measurements in different ways. We have towers, and we have satellites, onboard sensors, and the result is, a kind of a curve that looks like this that tells us how production is occurring in the landscape, usually captured by some kind of a vegetation index. So with Feng's work, he's developed something called the Spatial and Temporal Adaptive Reflectance Fusion Model, or STAR-FM. And basically what he does is he combines Landsat 30-meter resolution data, which is every 16 days, which often has gaps because of cloud cover, with MODIS daily 500-meter data to sort of fuse it together and provide surface reflectance at the prediction date. And for anyone who is interested, I can provide the papers that Feng has published on this with the algorithms included. But then the vegetation indices are derived and used to predict crop phenology where direct observations are lacking. And he's been applying this across multiple LTAR sites. Kind of related to that is the work that Martha Anderson has been doing as well, using the same STAR-FM data cubes to to look at evapotranspiration across precipitation gradients. And this is very important for being able to understand irrigation needs in agriculture. So in water-limited environments, these decisions need to provide, you need to make decisions about irrigation, about when to apply it and how much to apply. And those are really very critical decisions that affect really basic yield dynamics in the crops. So we really need to have this kind of more sophisticated decision support for irrigation that takes into account these aspects of evapotranspiration. So she developed data cubes of evapotranspiration over space and time using the STAR-FM system. So she's worked modeling sites across the Corn Belt in Nebraska, Iowa, and Illinois. And again in Maryland to study relationships between agriculture and water quality in the Chesapeake Bay. And then out in California, which is a future, this is kind of the region of a future LTAR site to look at irrigation support in the wine growing regions of California. In the last, I want to say 2 years really, there's been an emergence of cross LTAR projects within the network. The first of these is, this is kind of sort of moving things forward from our previous efforts with soil moisture with Mike Kosh, who's leading these efforts to develop soil moisture measurements across, and soil moisture products across the country. So the value for doing this is really in being able to supplement our data and our understanding about soil moisture across broad areas where we can't take measurements. So I mentioned before this idea of putting in 3 soil moisture sensors. This is what our soil moisture sensor nests look like in the field. And in this one farm, I have this is the setup that I had this last year, where I had 9 sensors sort of spread throughout the farm, located at some of these grid points where we take biomass and soil texture and soil core data. And then we also have an EC tower located right up in this area near one of these. So the advantage of doing this is really being able to contribute to something like the soil moisture active-passive data, which provides these estimates for soil moisture at continental scales. This is an incredibly useful and important data set for us. This is some of the products that are coming off of the SMAP mission. These are 5-kilometer pixels showing the changes from the 5th of October to the 15th when Hurricane Michael came through the southeast. So Mike is using LTAR and ARS watershed locations for the calibration and validation of soil moisture estimates. This has been a project that's been going on for quite a while, and it's moving forward into becoming the sort of cross-site LTAR work. So Little River is the Gulf Atlantic Coastal Plain where I am, but we also have sites set up, across the country in Indiana, Iowa, Idaho, Oklahoma, and Arizona. And see, these are some of the data sets that Mike has been working with from the Little Washita in Oklahoma, and I won't pretend to even begin to tell you everything about this data set, but what I can point out here is the in situ is in red, so this is the ground truth, and then the other values that are measured from this map are indicated in different colors. Here the blue, black, and green. And you can see that there's some issues with bias in some of the data that Mike has been working with, but they do a pretty good job of following the precipitation events across this is the Oklahoma site. So, and this is kind of a little map that shows the location of the sensors in the field. And again, Mike has also published quite a bit on this, so if anyone's interested, I can point you to Mike or his publications. This is a fairly new project that is now, they just submitted a publication last week, I think, to Science of the Total Environment. And it's being led by Don Browning out of the Jornada experimental range, looking at plant phenology. So Don is exploring the very rich data set that's coming from these phenocamps that are located across the LTAR network. So the phenocam network is a network of about 500 cameras that are 4-band cameras taking images every 30 minutes during daylight hours. This is the one that's pointed at the field where you saw earlier where I had my UAV flying. This is a cotton field in Georgia. And so this is the kind of imagery that she'll be, she could sort of be pulling from, and she's using that to compare with sort of modeled production information using satellite imagery to develop a sort of quantitative relationship between the two. And these are some of the results that she's going to be reporting next week at the AGU meeting in San Francisco. So if any of you are going to AGU, you can try and get to Dawn's presentation there. It's going to be on Friday the 13th at 4:15. But essentially she took MODIS 250-meter data and derived growing season length for 60,000 randomly selected points across different land cover data classes. NLCD is the National Land Cover Database. So she looked at areas of cultivated crops, grasslands and shrublands, pasture and hay, and shrub and scrub classes. And then within that was able to sort of capture the variability of each of these LTAR sites and map those to that kind of productivity area, that heat map. So what she found was that LTAR research locations occupy most of the production potential space with production systems in different domains. So the brown you see here corresponds to these grazing land sites, the blue correspond to the integrated systems, and the green corresponding to cropping systems. So they sort of map out pretty well. And this question about how LTAR sites are represented, or how they represent U.S. agricultural productivity and the U.S. agricultural landscape in general, is a really important question, because for LTAR we have this collection of 18 sites, and it's sort of almost it was not by design that those 18 sites were selected. They were selected because of a rich data legacy and the capacity to be able to carry out this program. So we need to understand now how representative are we as a network of U.S. agricultural land. So this is a big question in a group that I've been leading, and Dawn has been looking at this question also within her group. So this is some more sort of information on that. This is not exactly a remote sensing project, but a lot of the data that was used for this analysis was derived from remote sensing data layers. So one of the projects that we've been working on is trying to define what our agroeco regions are in the USDA LTAR network. And to begin that, we started with a representativeness analysis of 15 bioclimatic variables that we assessed for each of the LTAR experimental plots and fields and then looked at how those, how they varied relative to sort of how the mean of those varied across the US. So pixel by pixel, how representative those pixels were of LTAR experimental locations. And so what we see is that, it's really not too terribly bad, actually. The areas that you see that have low representativeness are actually, really high sort of alpine systems, or they're salt lakes, or an area where we have absolutely no experimental plots. And so this is one way that we can begin to kind of address the problem or the question of how representative are we of U.S. agriculture. So this is an analysis that was done as a preliminary analysis for a paper that we're putting together over the next couple of months. Other cross-site LTAR projects are ongoing. We have two projects that are involving the use of synthetic aperture radar. This is an area that is of great interest to me. It's something I've been trying to learn a lot about. It's, for any of you who have been sort of like exploring it, you'll know that it's a really different beast than optical imagery. And so I've been spending some time trying to, educate myself about SAR and its potential uses. So one of the main advantages for SAR is the ability to, have data collection in cloudy areas, which is very common in the part of the world where I work. Every day in the summer we have clouds. And so we cannot rely on optical data alone for measurements. So one of the questions that the JChem SAR intercomparison experiment is looking at is using radar SAT-2, which is a Canadian satellite. It's a C-band satellite to identify crop type and then use it to model LAI and biomass for specific crops. One of the crops that they do not have in their modeling framework is cotton. So that's been sort of my contribution to the project, is to be able to contribute ground data for cotton measurements so we can start to model cotton using SAR data. Another one is the NASA UAV SAR AM/PM campaign that was flown over the summer. This is the flight. So this is the airplane that is run by JPL with a SAR sensor on it. It was an L-band sensor. The idea was to try and I'm sorry for my misspelling of preparation, but this is a NISAR preparation mission. So we're trying to collect SAR data over specific sites where we had some ground measurements ongoing, and my site in Tifton was one of the agricultural sites that was flown, so we were able to get several UAV SAR data sets over the course of the year. There were some glitches and issues, so we only got 7 data sets over Tifton, but it was a nice kind of look across most of the production season for cotton and peanuts. And so from this, we're hoping to be able to participate in the CalVal development for crop type and soil moisture data products that are going to be coming out of NISAR, and hoping that the LTAR network, we're sort of trying to orient ourselves so that the LTAR network can be a CalVal network for NISAR, and we're trying to work through with NASA some of the implications for data sharing and so forth. But currently, in this last project that we had 2 LTAR sites: the Gulf Atlantic Coastal Plain, and then the Lower Mississippi River Basin LTAR sites were flown. And then there were a couple of other ARS locations out in Arkansas that were also captured during that campaign. And that data is publicly available. So if anybody wants to take a look at the UAV SAR data that was flown over the summer. It's available on their website for JPL. So moving forward, we have a lot of challenges ahead of us. Like I said, this is an emerging, oh my gosh, I better finish up. I didn't realize it was so late. Okay, I'll move along quickly. So our biggest issues have to do with data processing, the ethics of data sharing, being able to standardize and containerize workflows and documenting procedures for networked level research. It's one thing to be doing things as an individual site. So if this is my little model here of my site where I do my own little GIS work in my little lab in Tifton, and maybe I have 2 or 3 connections across the network. What we need to move towards is a much more fully connected research network where data storage and data processing dilemmas are resolved. And looking forward, we need to think about how that's going to look in 5 years' time. And what I'm looking at is really trying to see how we can incorporate artificial intelligence and machine learning with big data so that we don't lose track of the integrity of these very high quality, what I call small, slow, clear streams of data, which are very good quality data coming from hands-on field work that we have a lot of confidence in the quality of that data, and merging that and fusing that with these sort of big, fast, noisy rivers of data that we're getting off of our EC towers and this multiple telemetry connected arrays of sensors that are constantly providing information. So how do we merge these appropriately and then understand how these data streams affect our measurements at different scales? So the solution to all of this is you, and I'm saying you in general, but we need help to solve these problems of agriculture into the future, and we welcome expertise, and we welcome students and faculty and researchers to join us in this effort. So that is all I have to present. I'm sorry I went over, but
Perfect.
I'm happy to try and answer any questions if we have time. So.
So any questions for Lisa?
Yes.
So your big question is validation, or, the data processing stuff that might come in the commercial side, whatever, but are you happy with validation of remote sensing versus on the ground stuff? Is that happy? Or is that just?
I think that, I think we want to move beyond just being a Cal-Val network. Like, we want to be in the position of, that taking that into, incorporating that into understanding how that relates to the big questions, the research questions in the LTAR network. So, I guess maybe it was a year and a half ago, I pointed out to some of my colleagues in the network that, we have this incredible resource to be a validation network for a lot of groups, NASA included, but that's not the be-all, end-all of our network. That's not why we exist. So I would not be happy with just that. I want to get there, but that's not where I want to stop. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think I was asking an inverted question.
Oh.
Are the methods now, because we're a methods place,
Okay.
are the methods okay, or? You have a remote sensing picture, it's a picture, right? How well is that represented?
I think in some cases it's better than in others. I think Mike Kosh has done a lot of work in refining the validation process for soil moisture. But as far as the UAV work goes, that's still wide open. I just got my drone 3 years ago. And I was one of the first ones in the LTAR network to start. We've been using red edge cameras, which were the best thing I could find because they had something of a calibration available. What they're trying to sell to farmers right now is totally uncalibrated sensors, which are useless for us in research, which you all understand. And we don't have in the LTAR network the level of expertise that we need from you guys to be able to understand how valid those data sets that we're getting from those calibrated sensors are. So I think it's far from resolved in some aspects.
Because that seems like where we can help.
Absolutely,
You know, we're
yeah.
not biologists mostly, or
I hope so,
ecologists.
yeah.
Yeah.
I had a couple of quick questions. The validation work done for SNAP, is that data publicly available, the moisture content measurements that were done on the ground?
I believe so, yeah. I think there, I was looking at the SMAP website earlier today, you know, to pull down that GIF that I put up there, and there, yeah, I did see some links to some of the ground control data. I don't think that's all of it,
Okay.
because I think some of it has not yet been published, like papers haven't been published, so if you wanted to have access to those data, then you'd have to probably talk to the PIs, and they would probably be willing to share with you as long as they are provided with authorship rights, you know. But most people are pretty open to sharing,
Okay.
as long as you agree to cooperate with them.
Another quick question.
Yes.
The evapotranspiration maps that you showed by
Yeah.
Martha Anderson,
Yeah.
did she just use Landsat and MODIS, or EcoStress was part of it too? I think.
You know, that's a good question. I think I would call Martha and talk to her about that, because I know Martha has been really interested in the EcoStress products, and I don't know if she has incorporated those or not.
Okay.
As far as I know, the Star FM just is working with MODIS and Landsat,
Okay.
but she may have found a way to pull in the EcoStress down.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
So the study that was looking at the National Land Cover Database, it was for,
Yeah.
around here, we have a lot of issues with wetlands and pasture
Right.
and grasslands all being
Yeah.
sort of mixed up and
Yeah.
confused.
Yeah.
Are you seeing, how is that affecting the research on that front?
You know, I have the same problem in Georgia, and I don't think it's really resolved. So I kind of would treat that with skepticism,
Okay.
which it looks like you are. So
Well,
yeah,
I
I
was
mean,
just very
because
curious if
we
they
know,
were-
yeah, we know
yeah.
that those accuracies are a little bit questionable. Yeah, yeah.
Other questions?
So you just mentioned AI used in quite a lot of different sites, and right now all sites has their own data to run AI algorithm, or somehow it's all centralized into one, something like remote sensing group, and everybody use the remote sensing group's data and to try to run their AI algorithm. And are there right now special applications already use those kind of AI algorithm on those kind of data?
We do not have a centralized data repository yet. That's the direction that we're going in. So there is an initiative in ARS called the Data Innovations Project, and they're standing up, I don't know how many dozens of terabytes of storage space for an image server. And the idea is to be able to kind of provide that for the centralized image processing. And that is going to be accessible to our HPC system called SciNet. Not Skynet, SciNet. The computer cluster is called Ceres, but we're also developing more computer clusters around the country, and then actively trying to work on training opportunities for scientists within ARS to become more literate in using things like Jupyter notebooks and Python scripting to be able to run some of these analyses. So right now that we don't have that, but that's the direction we want to go in.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are there any quite a lot, some already applications using something like artificial intelligence or neural network, those kind of things? existing?
Yeah, so the work that I showed, the very first project that I showed on the hyperspectral mapping project, that has been working with CNNs for classifying the grasslands. So that's been a really interesting kind of approach because, you know, it's this very rich hyperspectral data that's, you know, many, many terabytes, and trying to derive from that some, you know, mapping information that can help us to really understand the biology of the grasslands in the eastern plains of Colorado. Rowan's been doing a pretty good job with it. You know, those were the preliminary results that we saw so far, and it's looking a lot better than what they had to begin with. So he's refining it, but he is using that kind of an approach.
There will be a little get-together with coffee and cookies outside if you want to pick Alisa's brain further, but I think it's been really interesting. I was speaking to Jeff earlier about every time you learn something new with these seminars. Jeff thought that picking corn means going to Wegmans and putting the corn in your basket. You know, now he knows this corn actually has to get to Wegmans through research like this. No, I think it's fascinating. I really am enjoying the collaboration with folks like Alisa and using drones and so on. And I think in terms of imaging, the contributions you as imaging scientists can make in providing high quality calibrated cameras that I hope we don't oversell and under-deliver, because farmers are extremely pragmatic people, right? You showed a lot of, I think, national initiatives, policy initiatives, things like that. But things like you know, soil maps related to moisture and anything that impacts farm management, it needs to be really spot on, cost-effective, accurate, and precise. You know, otherwise farmers are not interested, and cheap. You know, so I think there's a big challenge here to integrate remote sensing from the policy level down to the farm level, which is, I think is very exciting.
You know, I will say one other thing that since I've been working in USDA, and maybe it's like this in some other sectors of the economy also, but if you ever go to an expo or a farm show, you'll be amazed at how many people have these neato gizmos and products and things that are going to solve all your problems. And there is a lot of snake oil in the business. And so one of the biggest contributions that we as researchers can make to the industry, to the sector, the agricultural sector, is really just trying to get at the truth and what is really working. Because people make a lot of pretty wild claims, and you know, 2 years ago, like I said, when I was trying to buy a drone, I was trying to get sold, you know, $10,000 systems that would have been totally useless for me. And that's being pushed on crop consultants and farmers all the time. They're spending big bucks on this stuff, but it doesn't really work.
We've been, Carl does a lot of the calibration, reflectance type calibration, and we're amazed at how few service providers are providing calibrated imagery. So the product you see week 1 versus week 2, they claim there are changes, but maybe it was just atmospheric changes, you know, things like that. So I think it's really the onus is on us as scientists and engineers and call it the experts in these kinds of things related to imaging, is to make sure that we don't do damage here. So anyway.
Thank you.
Soapbox. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
As I said, there's some coffee and cookies. First come, first serve. Yes.